Thank you all for coming out on Sunday morning. Glad to see you here. What we're going to do this morning is to talk briefly about the exhibition. And I'm going to ask the artists some questions, both about the work in the exhibition and the larger practice in order to situate the works in the exhibition that I selected within a larger context. Tony Carmen came to me some time ago and asked me if I would do a project for Expo Chicago. I have been doing for a number of years various curatorial projects, primarily with museums and art centers. Doing a curated project in an art fair was certainly a very different kind of proposition because each context suggests the larger meaning of the activity. A museum is very different from a community-based art center, which is very different from an international art fair. So one of the things that I knew I wanted to do within the context of this art fair, because it is the first, and it is a kind of re-emergence of Chicago within the conversation of global art fairs. I first wanted to reiterate, as it were, that here in Chicago we do have a number of artists who have been functioning for quite some time in a very conspicuously visible way in the conversation around art making on a global level. And I wanted to achieve that by inviting some of those artists to be in the exhibition. At the same time, because there is a dynamic tradition here in Chicago of artists coming out of various institutions, and because Chicago is a major American city that has an extraordinary range of art production, along with highlighting those artists who have been on the global platform, I also wanted to use it as an opportunity to bring some other artists into the conversation as well. So I selected 5 artists who do have substantial global reputations, and then asked them to invite 5 other artists who were at the emerging or mid-career level or other levels in their careers, and to then shape that work into something that could stand as a meaningful, coherent exhibition and conversation as far as the conversation amongst the works in the exhibition. So that's how this project came about. All of the 5 artists that I initially selected were known to me. Some of them I know very well. Some of them I have recently met and have gotten to know. The others, some of them were new to me, so there was an aspect of chance and surprise in this exhibition for me too that I wanted to engage in by having the artists select the artists. And then I went to the studio and selected the work with an eye towards shaping that into something coherent. So I'm showing you briefly, and I can't even see them because I don't have a laptop here and they're behind my head, and I don't want to turn away from you, but I need to briefly just. These are installation views of the exhibition. For those of you who haven't seen the exhibition, the other thing that I should say in looking at this was that I was given the booth, and I wanted to also think about the space itself in which the work was being presented. I wanted to, in this context, not deal just with the 3 the walls or the square space of the exhibition booth, but to introduce an interesting architectural element into it as a way of both breaking up the squareness of the space, as well as giving myself additional surfaces to work on in terms of hanging the amount of work that I knew I was going to have to hang. And so today, we've invited 3 of the artists in the exhibition. Obviously, we couldn't have all 10 of them here because we are functioning within some time constraints. But amongst those 3, I wanted to have a conversation with 3 artists who are, in fact, at different points in their career. Kendrick Mcfarlane. Kendrick is the youngest artist in the exhibition, and he is, in fact, still a student at SAIC in the painting program, and he was selected by Kara James Marshall. I had seen his work previously about a year and a half ago in an exhibition he did at the Cisco Center. And I was taken by his work then and was really happy that his work reemerged in this context when Kara James Marshall selected him for this exhibition. And Patrick Chamberlain is an artist that I'm very happy to say I recently came to know. And that for me has also been one of the really pleasurable aspects of this project, is having work introduced to you that I may not have been familiar with. Patrick is an artist who has been, while working for a number of years, has also had a professional career in a field outside of art making, and is now engaged in art making as his full-time professional activity. And Patrick was selected for the exhibition by Jessica Stockholder, who is here with us this morning also. And Patrick is Jessica's husband. So they're an art-making couple, and I was very happy that she introduced me to Patrick and his work. And finally, Barbara Caston, who I've known for a number of years, who was formerly a colleague of mine in the photography department at Columbia College, Chicago. Barbara has been making very significant work for some 4 decades now. Barbara is one of those people in the contemporary moment who had been very significant in terms of the conversation around the relationship of photography and abstraction. Barbara has several publications of her work is shown in museums and galleries all over the world since the early 1970s. It's okay, I'm there too with you. Okay, so I wanted to begin this morning by asking each of you to just briefly talk about the work that you have in the exhibition and to place that work within the larger context of your work and ideas. So we start with Kendrick.
All right, well, the 2 paintings that Dowd Bay chose for the exhibition are kind of, recent work. It's work that's really trying to approach figurative painting in different ways. and at the same time exploring mark making and trying to, you know, take on some of the things that the old masters have used as far as composition, color relationships, but then also try to introduce new devices and gestures in that painting. So also adding some kind of cartoony references, illustration, graphics, things like that, and then merging that into, you know, abstract paint marks and things like that. So it's kind of like a new direction that I've been going with my work. And as Daoud Bey said, I'm still a student, so it's something that's still kind of developing. And I'm just trying to see, you know, with each painting, it's kind of like an experiment. So it's like, okay, well, like I've done this before. Now, you know, how do I make the figures move? How do I make the figures act and have a relationship? Or how do I have the figures engaging in something that's very provocative or something that's very dangerous or very, you know, whatever. So that's kind of like how these paintings are kind of developing as of this moment. For the first painting, which was like the ear landscape, so you have the four figures that are kind of standing in a pole-like position with a very kind of strange landscape. That was, I would say, like a breakthrough painting where, you know, after months and months of changing these images, I kind of came to this one point, and that kind of opened up the doors for like new directions to follow as kind of like, you know, trying to see the aesthetics that came from that image, and then trying to investigate more as to how I can make more compelling images in that nature. The second painting, which was the portrait work, that's entitled Venus as a Boy. And I think that painting was a result of me just building more confidence as a painter. You know, it was kind of like one of those sessions where everything was just working very smoothly. It wasn't like a struggle. I kind of had a lot of control as a painter. So I think it was really nice that these two paintings were included in this exhibition because, you know, one of them, you know, was extremely difficult to create, whereas the other one was, you know, very just easygoing and very relaxed. And I think that really does kind of reflect on how sometimes as an artist in the studio, you may have work that comes to you easily and you know it's finished, and other works that you may hate, that you just feel disgusted by, but then the next few months you realize that's like your best piece. You know, so I think it was really beautiful that I had the chance to show those two pieces together. So yeah.
Okay, Patrick.
Yes.
The works in the exhibition, how do those works figure within the larger context of your work?
So Dowd hung 3 paintings from what I call a Baby Babel series, and that started in a way like a lot of paintings and other series of paintings start. I was mixing some paint, and I loved the color of it and everything about it, and I had this momentary thought, oh, I wonder what it tastes like. I would like to eat it. And then I mean, you know, I realized that wasn't probably a very good idea. I work with oil paint. I don't know, maybe acrylic you can eat, but oil paint's not a good idea. But then I started thinking about what it would feel like in my mouth, and I was thinking what a babyish thought I'd had, and that made me think about babies and their mouths, and they making baby babble, and you know, blah, 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 la la la, blah blah. And I thought how, you know, in a way like you open the mouth, the baby, and makes these noises, and when you watch babies babbling, they really love it. And this is kind of like how I experience when I'm lucky at painting to be that way. And then at a certain point it makes a little bit of sense, and they repeat it and they enjoy it. And so I began to think about, well, that's how at least a significant part of what I do in the studio is like that. It is a kind of a babbling and a response to painting, and the baby opens his mouth and the painter opens up the stretcher and finds out what's in there and what can be useful and significant. And so that's, I think, what those paintings came out of, and they continue to come out of that kind of where a sound or a gesture is made and things follow from that. And I, in a lot of my work, very much following the direction that the paint takes me, and of course applying to that some, you know, all the years you have looking at paintings and being told about various formal issues and things like that. But what really motivates is kind of like this beautiful moment when you chance upon some beautiful piece of babbling. I think for me it's that way. Yeah.
Hey, Bob?
When I started back in the 60s, I was not a photographer. I started in sculpture, fiber sculpture at the time. That was the big thing. And my introduction to photography was really through collecting. So there was a great emphasis in my way of working that didn't come from a photographic point of view. It came more as part of the process of incorporating photography into other media that I was more familiar with. So not being trained as a photographer, I approached things in the way that I knew, which was painting and sculpture. So through the years, I have always tried to incorporate photography. I don't try to how do I say? It's kind of from the other point of view. Even though I'm labeled a photographer, I really feel like the things I do, photography is an important element, but it's not because I'm tearing apart or looking for other points of view about photography. It's really kind of inserting photography into other media. So the other media are almost more important. So what happened to make these two works possible, which have been in the last couple of years, is an opportunity I had to get back into the work seriously, sponsored by a distinguished artist award that I had at Columbia. And I got back into the studio, and I went back into my old mode, and what I wanted to do, the goal was to question, in a way, can a photograph be abstract? Because the whole reality of photography is just that, reality. You have to have something in front of the camera and to be viewed, to be captured on film, or in today's day, digital. So it wasn't so much about the technique, but it was about whether that technique could actually be expanded to present a concept that didn't deal with any representation. And so I thought about that for a while and decided that I had to choose materials and objects that they in themselves had no representation. So I started with clear sheets of plexiglass. Plexiglass is a form, is a material, and when you put light upon it, creates a shadow. So I basically was trying to photograph that third step along the way, and that is photograph the shadow, not so much even the light, because the light is part of the process of creating the shadow. And because of those two things, we can see the shadow, but we can't see the form because it's clear, a sheet of plexiglass. So that's how I was trying to arrive at some sense of abstraction. Now, these are the worst slides I've ever seen in my life of my work, but and I would have provided some others, and so I hope you will go and go back to the booth, which is 616, I think, right? Isn't that the number? And take a look at all of our work in the reel. But that's what I was, that's where I've been working, and the kind of thing I've been working with and toward, is the idea of not representing something, but of showing the process more of how a photograph can be abstract, but it's not the photograph that's abstract. In my case, it's the sculpture, because without the light, there is no sculpture. And without the photograph, there's no work of art. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but anyhow, you get it, right?
You're kind of going where you go when you're in the studio because you engage with those ideas by making things.
Yeah.
But this is the internal conversation. It's not logical always. It has a pretext and a context, and it results in objects. But thanks for thinking out loud like that. So, one of the things that I thought was interesting about doing the exhibition here in an art fair was something that I hadn't quite anticipated. And I mentioned earlier that most of the curatorial projects that I've done, most of them have taken place in museums. Others have taken place in what could probably be called nonprofit art centers of one kind or another. But the assumption in those spaces, whether people think about it this way or not, is that you're going to both engage with the objects and you're going to engage with a set of ideas. Certainly within the context of the museum, you don't go there with the expectation that you're going to buy something. It's pretty clear, I think, to most people that the museum has in fact acquired the objects, and that's how they came to be there. And they are there as part of a larger historical conversation with other objects in the museum, whether contemporary objects in a contemporary institution or with the broad sweep of history in the context of an encyclopedic museum. So the art fair context is significantly different because works are on display. It is I guess you could call this a semi-public context because everyone is free to come if you are willing to pay the price of admission. But basically, the dealers are here not to fulfill the function of a museum, which is basically to just show the work and engage in a conversation around ideas, but to actually bring these works into the marketplace. In my particular incident, I curated the exhibition, and I'm not the authorized agent, so to speak, of any of the artists in the exhibition, which I have to say how I didn't think about it, I don't know, but I didn't. But as soon as the exhibition was installed, as soon as I had finished installing, a dealer friend from New York came in, was looking around. I like it. How much is that one? I'd like to get it. I'm interested in it. I'll take it. I'm like, excuse me? And I'm thinking, I'm the artist / curator. I'm not the dealer. Why I didn't think about it that way when I'm at an art fair in a booth, in some ways much like the other booths, was an interesting awakening. And I have also gotten 3 persistent emails from a collector who is really, really, really interested in trying to acquire one. And finally, I had to say, I'm not authorized to even respond to your request because I don't represent the artists. Those who are affiliated with galleries, please get in touch with the gallery. I'm not really authorized to even tell you if it's available because I don't know. It was available for my exhibition. So the context of the art fair brings me to the consideration of the curated project within the context of an art fair. And I know I've thought about it, and I just wanted to ask each of you, in terms of this curated project, in this particular context, it can mean many things. Certainly, it makes the work available to the conspicuously art-interested public who comes to these kinds of events. But I'm just wondering for each of you, it may be a different kind of experience. I know that I have shown in these kinds of events myself for some 2 decades now. But I've never organized or orchestrated or curated a situation in this kind of context. So it was new and different for me in that regard, and I'm wondering what it was or what it is for each of you to be in a curated project in the context, not of a gallery where you've all shown or museum, but an art fair. Maybe we start with you, Bob.
Well, I don't know if there's a lot of difference, actually, because when you look at some of the booths here, there are a lot of curated shows, because people are I think have organized, some of the people have organized their booths according to a concept, and show a variety of work along that line. So I'm not sure if I see a lot of difference. The difference is the commercial aspect of it, I'm sure, which is what you experienced. And I think curators and dealers are almost have to know. I mean, a dealer, I think, has to know as much as a curator, and it has to be as versatile in talking about the work as a curator would. So I don't know. I think the roles these days are much more interchangeable.
What do you think, Pat?
Well, I don't have a great deal of experience with art fairs, but I liken it to, it feels like a cocktail party. If I want to really know somebody, I'll invite them to dinner or go for a coffee and sit and talk or something like this. But a cocktail party is also very exciting, and you meet a lot of people, you see a lot of work, and it's quite exciting. And I've enjoyed being a part of it. But I think that the ability, at least for painting, I think of it as something that requires some duration. And the context of an art fair seems to me to be a way to get acquainted, but not to know. Well, you have to get acquainted with someone before you can know them, but if you want to know work, you have to come to studio or gallery, museum, and spend time with it. That I don't experience this environment as being quite conducive to that. But it's a great way to get acquainted with a lot of great work, and this is a very impressive fair, I think, in that respect.
Kendrick.
For me, it was more of a learning experience. I just started to show my work about 2 years ago. And so ever since being at SAIC, what I've tried to do is, with every opportunity I get, whether it's going to a gallery show, going to a museum show, is just try to learn how that whole system works, And, it was just last year that I went to my first art show, or the Art Expo, which was Art Chicago, which was at the Merchandise Mart last year. And that was my first time ever being at something like this. And a lot of people that I spoke to recently, I guess, was saying that it wasn't as organized as this show. But I mean, to me, I thought it was very impressive. So to be able to be in a show like this the next year is just an amazing opportunity. And what I've tried to do is just learn how, as I said before, everything works. As far as the curator, what does he need? What does he want? What are the things you have to do to make sure everything's working smoothly? As far as installation, what's expected from you as the artist? And also coming into the exhibition, what does the work look like? For the people who are promoting their artists, what kind of things they say? Their body language, how do they get people into the space? For the artists, how do they talk about their work? The kind of events that they have alongside with the exhibition overall. All these things I'm just taking notes on, just so that, after school and once I start my career officially, I can kind of navigate myself better and know what to expect once I decide to do an art fair or an art show or work in a museum or whatever may happen in the future. So overall, this has just been like a educational experience for me. I'm just kind of taking notes, and that's basically how I'm treating this opportunity. So.
Because I do know a number of people have ask me about your work because you are a relatively new artist in this context. A number of curators, some of whom I know, you've had conversations with here, and some of the gallerists who are here. And I'm wondering, as a young artist who is still, while making your work, still very much within an academic art situation, how this shapes perhaps your perception of the art world. Because this is certainly one aspect of the art world. I tend to think that there are multiple art worlds, actually. But I'm just wondering how, as a young artist, this experience perhaps shapes your perception of the larger art world that you are, you might say, in training to enter, should you choose to continue.
Well, I think certainly, like, you have to, from what I've learned, I feel like you really have to know what you want, and you have to kind of be in control of yourself, because I think that there will be a lot of people who will try to steer you in certain directions. You know, maybe you should do this show, maybe you should do that show, you should work with this people, you should work for that person. But from what I've learned from doing these kinds of opportunities, that you really want to know how you want to frame your work, because I think everybody's different, everybody's making different kinds of art, and there's also different ways of framing that kind of work. And there's also different people who may enjoy working with the kind of work you're making. So I think from this this experience is really kind of allowing me to realize the importance of knowing what you want as an artist, and really believing in your work, and then once you believe in that, then finding other people who may want to help you get to where you want to be. So I think for me, that's kind of like how I see it, kind of asking, I think from looking at a interview Kerry James Marshall did on YouTube, he kind of talks about that. He's saying, once you get into the game, you have to ask yourself, like, what do I want out of this experience? What's at stake, all those kinds of things, that kind of comes into it. And so I think at this point, with an opportunity like this, where the work is in such a, legit space, I have to start asking myself, what do I really want from all of this? Because I think in the beginning, you have to, like, understand that anything is possible, but then out of all those possibilities and options, you have to kind of figure out what's going to make you the most excited, And I think that kind of goes back into the work with the figurative paintings and things like that. That's the reason why I take that direction, because dealing with those creative problems, I feel for me, it's the most exciting. And so I'm kind of following that. And now coming to this, and being in this situation, it's like, who like the people you work with, which curators, which dealers do you get most excited with? Which individuals are the ones that really makes you amped up and, ready to go back to the studio and just, continuously building on your ideas. So at the end of the day, that's kind of like how I look at the situation. It's just kind of knowing what you want and making sure you're just doing what you got to do to get what you want out of everything. So.
And I don't want to stay with this issue too long, but I think it's interesting too, because certainly for artists of my generation, or maybe artists more of our generation, this notion of wanting anything, I don't think you wanted anything other than to make your work, because the possibilities were there, but they were fewer. They did not seem to be as within reach. And now with the proliferation of galleries and art fairs and the proliferation of attention to younger and younger artists, with dealers lining up outside of studios in some MFA programs, of folks going to MFA shows to acquire work or to, sign up young artists for the gallery before someone else, snatches them up. It's a very recent phenomenon. It's not the way the world always was. So, for me, the idea of, being in art school and hanging next to Kara James Marshall is pretty darned extraordinary, I think. It wouldn't have occurred to me that I would be hanging next to, I don't know, Roy DeCarava, or, I probably would have shied away from it, not thinking I was worthy until another 15 or 20 years. But I think the mindset, and both the mindset and the opportunities at this point for younger artists are very different. And I think there are both good and not so good implications to that, because at the end of the day, the artist's first responsibility always has to be, I think, to the work. And the work either is or isn't going to get you wherever it is you're trying to get to, even though there now seems to be the possibility of more places to get to.
Could I say something to this?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's to be an artist is kind of like being a pebble on the beach. And I think there are a lot more beachcombers on the beach now. But still, to be an artist, you're like a pebble on the beach and you're pebbling. And if they pick you up, maybe they'll polish you and maybe they'll put you on a shelf. I don't know. But being an artist, you're pebbling. And you've always been pebbling. And you'll always be pebbling. And it's great to pebble.
I like the way
That doesn't change.
Yeah, I love the way you put that. But I also have to comment on on your very mature attitude about art making and your belief in yourself, because I think that's the main thing. Is like, you see these fairs and you see who's successful and who's selling for what prices, and the first thing you would think is that you might tend to make your work a little more saleable, right? So you kind of look for the trends. But I think if you can take the attitude, or at least believe in yourself enough to keep working at the way that you feel is your own process, that's the only thing that in the end is going to hold true. You might stray off and try different things, but I think ultimately, after 40 years of working, I can say that I'm back to where I began, and and that's really a very nice confirmation of who I am and what I believe in, and so I have to keep doing it. It just is natural.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think totally agree, and I think when I had my first exhibition in 2010, I definitely felt the pressure of making the work to kind of please the collectors and the people who are interested. And, I definitely learned my lesson from that experience. And, because, I wasn't being excited, I was trying to do the same thing twice, and I wasn't really investigating or experimenting. And I think that's the beautiful thing about, a successful practice, like a successful studio practice, is always asking questions and trying different things out and pushing yourself, making yourself uncomfortable and then seeing where that leads to. And as I said before, like I had a great conversation with one of my friends yesterday about just the idea of being excited at all times and, doing the things that make you excited and how important that is, especially for an artist, to kind of keep yourself entertained, keep yourself engaged. And, when you have people who are putting that work into shows, then that's kind of like the best thing that could happen. And to see people also being excited from what you've done as a result of your excitement, it's always like, the biggest blessing, so.
Sometimes that's hard to achieve when you're in a graduate program too, because, you're there to sort of sop up all the the energy and the thoughts of people who have been doing this for a long time. And I think that grad school is good and bad for that reason, that you almost you're testing your own ideas and seeing how valid and strong you are in your beliefs, because you're going to be pulled in many different directions by many different people's points of view, right? And so if you can come out of it with what you feel is closer to who you are, I think that's really a much better place to be.
Yeah. As an undergraduate, I'm still thinking about how the grad school experience will work out. But
Right.
I think a lot of people will say that, like you want to position yourself in an area where people are making the kind of work, maybe having, I guess, similar values and aesthetics
Right.
as to, what kind of work is being produced.
Yeah.
So, but as an undergraduate at SAIC, I think it's more loose. And, I know that graduate school is very kind of like a small group of people usually who's working in a discipline. But at SAIC, where you have, video artists, performance artists, photographers, painters, filmmakers, it's more open. And I think the conversation is much more entertaining and more engaging, because you can kind of talk about composition and then how does that apply to sound, or how does that apply to photography or painting, and then have like this amazing dialogue just about that.
Exactly.
So yeah.
It was one of the reasons am I taking this away from you, Dawood? I'm sorry. One of the reasons I chose Curtis Mann was that he was a student of mine, and actually I was his first seminar teacher, and he came in like tearing photographs apart and taking emulsion off of things. I mean, he was already making the work he's making now, but he didn't have the background and the confidence to feel that it was something that, I don't know, he just didn't have that yet, And I saw him try many different things, and now he's back to what he really was. And so, if nothing else, those years in grad school got him to believe in himself, and I'm proud of him because he's done that, and he's done it so well.
Definitely. Yeah, it's definitely hard when you're making work that you're not too sure about. To be honest, the painting with the ears with the four figures, I actually hated that painting after I completed it. Because like in that process, you're trying to like get towards something and it's just not working, and I left the studio just so miserable. Like I was like, I can't believe nothing worked out. Oh my God. But it wasn't until like 3 months later that I looked at the painting and realized this is like really something special, and this is something I shouldn't just like abandon. So I think those are like the interesting moments when you have work and you're not too sure if it's good or bad. You're kind of like confused about it. And I think in those situations you just have to give it time.
I think that's true.
just
Time
have
is
to,
it's really important to sit and live with the work for a while and just see, your own responses to it. It's nice to get some feedback from people because it gives you more things to think about. But you can't. Almost have to be very selective about who gives you the feedback too.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
That's very true. And I definitely know what you're saying, because back, where I was raised, they had this Blick art store, and there's a painter who used to, give classes there, and I would just stalk him all the time. And, he was a very, like, representational painter, like, very kind of, like, observational. That's all he did. And I remember presenting that image to him, and he was saying, like, oh, this is not your best painting, like, this is not that good, yada, yada, yada. But then showing it to other people and other professors, they're kind of, like, talking about how I should really build up on it. I presented the painting to Susanna Coffey, and she was just saying how you should really just develop this image and try to kind of go in different directions. So I definitely agree. Like, it really does matter as to who you're presenting the work to. And that kind of goes into what I was saying before is, trying to find collectors, curators, people who have similar values and who are getting excited about the same thing. That way, you're really kind of like, being in control of your career, and you're doing the things you want to do for your practice and, for your life.
But you've got to listen to the negative as well, because there's always a kernel of truth in it, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to, you mentioned Curtis Mann, who you selected for the show, I wanted to ask Patrick and Kendrick, as two artists who were selected for an exhibition that is basically a sort of conversation. What, for example, Patrick, the conversation that you and Jessica have as two artists, the nature of the relationship between your works and the conversations that you have around your work, and what those conversations might be.
Well, that's a good question. Actually, I knew Jessica's work. Maury Baden, who's a sculptor in Canada, introduced me to her work about 26 years ago. And at the time, I was wrestling with, as I have for decades, with Plato and his surrogates about art and the relationship between truth and art. And it's like Jacob wrestling with an angel. But I was thinking this comment that Nietzsche makes about we possess art lest we perish of the truth. And this was much in my mind. And at the time that Maury gave this lecture on contemporary sculptors, in which he showed slides of this artist, and I asked to borrow the slides of this artist, brought them home, made drawings from them, because I believe that this artist had something really very substantial to say to this particular question about truth and art and perspectival. And I mean, I could go on, but I tried to make it short. So about 2 years later, I met Maury, and he was with this artist, and turns out was an attractive young woman, and that I never remembered the names of people, so I didn't know her name. But anyway, so I met her, and whatever. So 24 years ago, next December, we got married, and so we have been conversing about these matters for the last 24 some odd years. I think my confidence in the art world, such as it is very much grounded in the fact that they had the perspicacity to pick up Jessica's work, because I think it's very substantial work. So yes, I mean, it is a very ongoing, very productive dialogue in my experience.
And Kendrick, having been selected by and having a relationship with Kara James Marshall, and you two are within the context of the exhibition, probably holding the space of figurative work in some way, even though your work, kind of in some ways alludes to both the figure and a more gestually expressive vocabulary. In some ways, much the way I think your work also skirts that boundary between representation and abstraction. Having been selected by Kara James, what kind of conversation do you see your works in, either specifically or within that tradition?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting because, me and Carrie, we actually had a chance to talk before the show. I had a chance to stop by his studio, and we had, a great conversation. And at one point, we were kind of just talking about approaches to painting, and, I was just trying to bring out some problems I have usually when it comes to developing images. And, from the talk, I kind of realized that, with his work, he's somebody who's very strategic, like he has a plan and he just follows it. And that's kind of like how he works, and each plan has to kind of go right. And if it's not right, you kind of have to keep on figuring out how to solve that problem. Whereas I think in the works that are in the exhibition, the pieces I have, it's actually kind of looking forward to mistakes and looking forward to kind of, just accidents, and then trying to use those accidents as a highlight, I guess you can say, for the piece. I think the way I work is very much so like in the kind of Francis Bacon direction, where he's just putting down marks, and those marks become a figure, and that figure becomes a landscape, and it kind of goes in that sense. So I think it's a very interesting conversation for sure. Um, and I think we both have this huge appreciation for the figure, and I think we both see so much potential. Of course, now there's a lot of kind of talk about how figurative painting is not as important and it's not really that relevant and things like that. But I think we both kind of see a lot of possibilities with the genre, and because I think when you're making work in the studio and you're making a painting, and once you finish that painting, I would say 100 doors just open up for different directions as to how you can take that work. Um, so I think that's kind of like where we share just this conversation of how to expand on figurative painting, different ways to go about making that kind of work. I see a lot of possibilities of kind of combining different things into the work. Of course, I usually bring in this very strong foundation of Renaissance, Venetian, Baroque painting structure, but then kind of add on abstract, expressionist gestures, sometimes cartoons, sometimes illustrations, and try to blend these things in together to try to create something that's totally different and as a way to make new images. And I think, from not having a structure, that kind of allows you to get into a space where new images can emerge, when you're making a mistake, so you're putting something into the painting, and it's not so step by step. And once again, that kind of goes back to how I was saying how it becomes more exciting. The conversation becomes way more engaging. And also kind of talks about how every artist is different. As some people, like Carrie may enjoy having a plan and having a strategy. And that's the kind of excitement that comes from him. Whereas for me, it's more so, letting the work kind of create itself and just being involved in the creative process and not being so tied down to one plan. Letting the mistake open up other possibilities. So I think that's kind of from my eyes, the conversation that we're having in this exhibition.
Okay. We're going to be wrapping up shortly, so I thought if we have time for maybe one, possibly two questions before we wrap it up. If anyone has a question, we'd be happy to take the microphone here. Thank you.
We can hear you.
No.
My question is kind of a open-ended, and anyone who cares to answer it can, but it's just what you consider to be sort of barriers or difficulties in the studio, or things that are just hard about being an artist.
Yeah.
Since you're all artists here and all have very different approaches and practices.
I think sometimes you find it's very hard to get started. And I believe that there's a real connect between hands and brain in this activity. So my little helpful hint would be, at one point I remember I bringing roasted peanuts into the studio because I would break them open and I could get my fingers going like that. And it's unbelievable, but it actually can help you get going. Just to get your hands doing something. Yeah, that's what's up.
I would agree with that. I think the hardest thing is definitely just getting in the studio. I think sometimes, with life and other things that happen, you can easily be kind of distracted. But I kind of feel like it's very similar to working out. Once you do that mile and you kind of feel the pain, and you kind of want to keep going. You want to keep building, and you feel so good after that workout. You feel so good after leaving that studio. But definitely, sometimes you may have the first day that's not so rough. But I think it's always good, if you're kind of coming back into the work after a long break, not having too much expectation for that studio time, but really kind of allowing yourself to just try things out and just make, and not trying to be so pressured to having something great come out of that first session. So I would say for sure it's just getting to that point where you're in the studio working. I think that's the hardest part. But once you're doing that, you're good to go.
What I have to do is shut off the email. the computer and stay away from thinking, just get to moving. So the peanut idea I'm going to use.
Sunflower seeds.
Okay, I'm going to thank all of you for coming out this morning, and to thank the artists for coming out this morning too. Certainly, if you haven't had a chance to see the exhibition, I certainly encourage you to do so. If you have seen it, I think it holds up to repeated viewing, so I encourage you to take another look. It's here until the end of the day in booth number 616 at the end of the 600 hour heading away from here. So thank you all very much for coming out.